Fairy tales were never meant to be gentle. Before they were softened for children, they were dark, seductive, and laced with danger. We are returning to those roots, where passion and peril intertwine, where innocence is lost, and where sin is not just a temptation, but an invitation. Welcome to Once Upon a Sin, a realm where the stories you thought you knew are rewritten in blood and desire, where villains are lovers, heroes are haunted, and the line between salvation and damnation is razor thin, so settle in for the first story. Once Upon a Sin, the Crimson Hood. They warned her, do not walk the woods alone. Do not stray from the path. The wolf is always watching, always waiting. He preys on foolish girls who wander too far. But Celeste was no fool. She walked into the dark, willingly. And the wolf? He had never met a girl like her. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, pine, and something deeper, something that didn't belong to the forest. Celeste moved slowly, the crimson cloak billowing with each step, the fabric whispering secrets against her bare thighs. Beneath it, her dress was light, delicate, an intentional contrast to the weight of steel strapped to her thigh. She had been warned. The wolf took women, lured them, broke them, ruined them. He was ruthless, insatiable, a ghost among the trees. No one ever found his den. No one ever saw the bodies. But Celeste had not come to be taken. She had come to hunt. A gust of wind curled through the trees, carrying the scent of something primal. Spice, sweat, musk, hunger. He was near, watching, her lips parted in a slow breath, her skin tightening with anticipation, not fear. Come to me. A snap of a branch, a shift in the shadows. Then he was there. A rough, calloused hand clamped over her throat, pressing her back against the nearest tree. His grip was firm, not strangling, just holding, claiming, assessing. She could feel his breath against her cheek, warm, unhurried, cruel. Foolish girl, he murmured. His voice was thick, deep, dripping with amusement. Did no one tell you what happens to little girls who walk alone at night? Celeste's lashes fluttered as she tilted her chin up, exposing the long column of her throat, letting him feel her pulse beat against his palm. They did, she whispered, but I don't think they told me the whole story. His fingers flexed, dragging along her pulse point, his thumb tracing the dip of her collarbone. His body was solid, heat radiating from every inch of him, pressing, crowding, testing. Celeste's lips curved in the barest of smiles. Good. Let him think he had the upper hand. You shouldn't be here. His breath was a slow exhale against her ear, deliberate, taunting. You smell too sweet, like honey and fire. You think I wouldn't taste that? A single, rough fingertip traced the line of her throat, the touch feather-light but possessive. She let out a breathy laugh, deliberately soft, a tease. Then do it. The air crackled. The wolf stilled. Then his teeth scraped against her jaw, slow, testing, before his tongue flicked against the hollow of her throat. Celeste shivered, but not in fear. She let her head tip back against the bark, bearing more of herself, inviting. A dark chuckle vibrated through him. Brave, he mused, his fingers sliding lower, tracing the edge of the crimson cloak. Or stupid. Celeste arched just slightly, her body almost brushing his, her lips parting with an exhale just heavy enough to be mistaken for surrender. Tell me, she purred. Do they beg first? The wolf stiffened, his fingers twitched, his breath hitched. Celeste tilted her head slowly, deliberately, letting her lips almost graze his. Before you ruin them, she whispered. Before you break them. His grip on her throat tightened. She could feel the tension rip through him, feel his restraint slipping, feel the monster inside him bristling at the challenge. Careful, he murmured, voice thick, dangerous. You don't want to know the answer to that. Celeste smiled, slow, wicked, knowing. Oh, but I do. And then she moved. A flash of steel, the glint of a hidden blade pressing against his ribs. His body went rigid. Celeste dragged the blade up, just enough to let the sharp kiss of metal scrape his skin. The power shifted. She felt it ripple between them, his hunger tangling with something deeper, something he hadn't expected to find in a girl who was supposed to be his prey. She wasn't afraid of him. She was starving for him, and he had never been hunted before. His breath was ragged now, not from fear, but from something else. Celeste leaned in, her lips grazing his ear. This, she whispered, pressing the blade deeper, is what you do to them, isn't it? She felt his pulse hammer beneath her palm. He was losing control. Good, because she was about to take it from him completely. You don't hunt, she murmured, her voice dripping with something intoxicating, something dangerous. You collect. You break. You feast on their fear, like it's the sweetest sin. She pressed her body flush against him, the pressure enough to make him hiss between his teeth. But did you ever think, Wolf, she whispered, that one day you'd find something you couldn't swallow? His hands fisted in the fabric of her cloak, torn between fight and surrender. Celeste, he growled, voice hoarse, raw, unraveling. She smiled. Poor thing. Then she drove the blade home. The wolf thought he was the one to be feared. But not all girls who wear red are innocent. Some don't come to be devoured. Some come to carve their name into the dark. If you crave more forbidden fairy tales, another sin awaits. Subscribe and step into the dark once again. Do you want more? Can you take more? The Briar Curse. A dark, seductive retelling of Sleeping Beauty where the cursed princess sleeps, but not peacefully, and the one who dares wake her must do far more than just kiss her lips. The castle was dead, wrapped in a shroud of silence so thick it seemed the air itself refused to stir. The walls, once gilded and grand, were now swallowed by thorn and shadow, their twisting vines pulsing as if alive. They called it the Sleeping Kingdom, a place where time had stopped, where dust never settled, where the fires in the great hall never fully burned out, where behind locked doors a princess lay untouched, but not at peace. Darian stepped over the broken threshold, the scent of decay and something sweet, almost cloying, curling in his lungs. They had warned him. Do not enter. The curse is not what you think. But Darian had never listened to warnings. His boots whispered across the stone, past wilted roses frozen mid-bloom, past statues of men with eyes still wide, faces twisted in horror. The kingdom had not simply fallen asleep. It had been swallowed whole. And yet, at the heart of it all, a girl lay waiting. The chamber was bathed in candlelight, the golden glow barely keeping the darkness at bay. And there she was, sleeping, a vision of softness and temptation, her body stretched across silk sheets, her golden hair spilling like liquid sunlight. The fabric of her gown was thin, far too delicate, clinging to curves that should have been untouched by time. But time had touched her. Her lips were parted, a flush painting her cheeks as if she had just whispered a secret against someone's skin. Her body was not at rest. Her fingers twitched, her chest rising and falling too deeply, her thighs shifting as if in search of something unseen. Darian exhaled sharply, his pulse a slow, heavy drumbeat. This was no innocent slumber. It was hunger. The princess, Auriel they had called her, was not simply sleeping. She was waiting. The air thickened, pressing against him, urging him forward. His boots whispered over stone as he approached the bed, his breath shallow. Her scent wrapped around him, something floral, something dark, something distinctly female. A kiss to wake her, the legends had said. But looking at her now, her body shifting restlessly, Darian knew. One kiss would never be enough. He braced his hands on either side of her, lowering himself, the heat of her skin just beneath his lips. A test, a temptation. And then her fingers curled in the sheets, his breath caught. Then a sigh, a soft broken sound that tightened his gut. Her pulse fluttered at her throat, her body shifting, her thighs pressing together in a slow, unconscious movement. She was not asleep, she was trapped. The curse was not a prison of stillness, but a prison of need. Darian swallowed hard, heat pooling low in his stomach. To wake her, he would have to do more than kiss her lips. Darian's fingers ghosted over the delicate skin of her wrist, trailing up her arm, across the fragile strap of her gown. Her breathing hitched, a silent plea. His lips brushed her throat and a shiver rippled through her body. So slight, so subtle, but undeniable. Oriel was aware. Trapped, helpless, craving, Darian's mouth grazed her ear. I could leave you like this. His voice low, teasing, edged with something cruel. Would you like that, princess? A sharp exhale, a whimper. Darian smirked. No, you wouldn't. His fingers traced her bare shoulder, the curve of her hip, the places untouched for 100 years. The air thrummed with magic, a spell meant to be broken, and he intended to break her with it. The princess woke, but not with a sigh of love, nor a gentle flutter of her lashes. She awoke starving, not for food, not for light, but for the touch of another. Her curse was not sleep. It was longing, and those who wake with such a hunger do not wake alone. But hunger takes many forms, and some are darker than others. Let me tell you another. A tale of forbidden indulgence, of a man who took what was not his to take, and a woman who was never his to claim, until she made him hers. This is the story of the Midnight Claim. The manor sat high upon the cliffs, its black towers piercing the sky, watching over the sea below like a sentinel of shadows. None who entered the master's domain ever left without being changed. Some whispered that the estate was cursed, that the women who entered its halls left broken or utterly ruined. Others claimed the master himself was the curse, a man whose touch branded, whose whispers ensnared, whose hunger was never satisfied. Liana had heard the warnings. She ignored them. She had come for one reason only, to put an end to the master of the house. The man who had taken what was not his, the man who had stolen from her, not gold, not land, but something far deeper. Her breath was even as she strode through the grand hall, her dress clinging like liquid silk to her curves, her pulse steady, her knife strapped tight against her thigh. The firelight flickered against the polished marble, shadows stretching long against the walls. She felt him before she saw him, a presence, dark, heavy, consuming. A hand caught her wrist before she even had time to react. The knife was wrenched from her fingers, spun from her grasp like it was nothing. A rush of heat pressed against her back, and a voice, low, smooth, sinful, curled against the shell of her ear. I was wondering when you'd come back to me. Her breath hitched. His fingers traced the line of her pulse, slow, deliberate. She turned only to be met with eyes like smoldering embers, a smirk playing at lips that had once traced her skin, had once whispered promises she had never wanted to hear. Lucian Valen, the master of the house, the man she had sworn to kill. And yet, his hands were on her hips now, possessive, burning. His touch sent a shiver down her spine, a heat pooling low in her stomach. She had come to end him. Instead, he was unraveling her. Lucian's grip tightened, pulling her flush against him. His scent was smoke and spice, leather and something wholly male wrapping around her like a snare. You should be afraid, he murmured, his lips brushing her temple, his voice dark silk and sin. She should have been. She wasn't. Liana let her hands trail up his chest, slow, teasing, feeling the way his muscles tensed beneath her touch. She was not his prisoner. She would never be. If she was in his grasp, it was because she had allowed it. I am not afraid of you, she whispered, letting her nails scrape lightly down his torso. His breath hitched, a small, subtle crack in his composure. Lucian's fingers dragged along her throat, tipping her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. His thumb brushed her lower lip, a whisper of a touch, but enough to make heat coil low in her belly. You should be, he murmured. Then his mouth was on hers, a claiming, a possession. Teeth grazing, tongues tangling, bodies pressed so tight there was no space between them. Liana gasped against his lips, not in fear, but in something far more dangerous. Want, need, craving. Lucian lifted her effortlessly, her back pressing against the stone pillar behind her. The kiss deepened, raw, unyielding, merciless in its hunger. His hands gripped her thighs, pushing the fabric of her dress higher, higher, until there was nothing between them but heat and the sharp edge of anticipation. Her fingers twisted in his hair, pulling, demanding, urging him closer. He answered with a growl, his mouth trailing lower, across her jaw, down the curve of her throat, tracing the pulse that thundered beneath her skin. The air crackled with something beyond magic, a force neither of them could deny. She had come to destroy him. Instead, she had given herself to him. Liana's breath came shallow, sharp, broken between his kisses. His hands moved with purpose, with reverence, with something dangerously close to worship. Skin against skin, heat upon heat, a slow, exquisite burn. Lucian's mouth found the hollow of her throat, teeth grazing, tongue soothing, sending shivers cascading down her spine. Her thighs tightened around him, pulling him closer, deeper, until there was nothing left but the feeling of being consumed. He moved inside her, slow at first, teasing, drawing out the moment until she was trembling beneath him. Then, a shift, a snap, a loss of control. His grip tightened at her waist, his pace growing relentless, desperate, claiming her as much as she claimed him. Liana gasped, fingers digging into his back, leaving marks he would wear for days. The room was filled with the sound of them, the rawness of their desire, the way their bodies moved as if this was always meant to happen. And when she shattered, it was not in surrender, but in victory. Lucian followed, a low growl against her ear, his hands tightening, holding her against him as he spilled his ruin into her. She had won. She had conquered the master of the house. And yet, she knew. This was far from over. She came to end him. Instead, she let him claim her. But what happens when a woman marked for destruction decides to stay? And what happens when the monster refuses to let go? The midnight claim is sealed, but the night is not over. If you crave more forbidden fairy tales, another sin awaits. Subscribe and step into the dark once again.